What's up, everyone? Josh White here. Thank you for joining us again on this deeply engaging episode of the Hero Front podcast. Now, on this special episode, I sat down with Jessica Manfre to explore her journey, insights from her book, Never Alone, Ruth and the God Who Goes Before Us, and her profound experiences as a military spouse. Jessica opens up about the challenges she faced in writing her book, including navigating personal trauma and vulnerability, particularly in her relationship with her father, who was a severe alcoholic. Now, throughout this conversation, Jess shares intimate stories about her journey through grief, including the loss of her stepmother and the profound impact on her identity. She reflects on pivotal moments such as reconnecting with her stepfather after a decade, the healing power of therapy, and how these experiences shaped her path to becoming a therapist herself. Listeners will gain valuable insights into resilience, faith, and community support as Jessica discusses the profound themes from her book and their relevance to both military and civilian audiences. From her role as a voice actor for the audiobook version of Never Alone to her advocacy for military spouses facing loneliness and isolation, Jessica's journey is a testament to the power of storytelling and human connection. Now, whether you're interested in mental health, advocacy, personal growth, or finding inspiration during challenging times, this episode offers deep wisdom and encouragement. So join us as Jessica Manfre shares her story of resilience and the transformative power of faith and community. Let's get after it. Welcome to the Hero Front Podcast, the 2022 Veteran Podcast of the Year winner. I'm your host, Josh White, and I talk with heroes around the world to inspire, educate, and to remind you that you are not alone. My own personal journey was marked by struggles like depression and alcoholism, which led me to almost lose my life. Now, after years of working on myself, I'm now blessed to say I have an abundance of pride and purpose, and I have made it my mission to share and spread these lessons by having insightful interviews with inspiring individuals, emphasizing trust, transparency, and meaningful conversation to drive positive action in our lives. Above all, I aim to inspire you to unleash your inner hero. We all have it in us, and it's time to bring it to the front lines of our lives. Let's get after it. I've been seeing you just all over my Facebook feed. You're like famous. I feel like I'm talking to celebrities or something. You know what I mean? You're on the Tonight News channel. You're on like these huge Christian platforms, with like massive fan bases to them and huge audiences. And I'm just like, dang, you're just getting after it. So, I got to applaud you for, the way that you've spread your positivity. You seem to be really, really good at that. And the message is so well received. That must be very validating for you with your book, Never Alone, and how many people that's probably touched at this point.
I have to be honest, it's not really my comfort zone. So like I tend to be a very, I joke about being codependent with the other two ladies that I run a nonprofit with. I like to do everything as a team. And so stepping out and doing this project where it was very much like mine, it was really hard. There was a whole lot of like imposter syndrome, which I think is something that we're all pretty familiar with. And I mean, there was a point where if someone asked me about my book prior to it being published, it was really hard to even talk about it because it felt selfish almost. It just wasn't a comfortable space for me talking about the nonprofit, talking about the work that I do, for military families with my friends. That's different. So it was a challenge. And it was a challenge then to, reach out to friends. But I got some really great advice from a pretty successful veteran friend of mine. And he said, I give 4 times and then I ask. It's all about relationships and friendships, investing in people and being genuine. And when you are that and you practice that, you shouldn't feel selfish, Right. So I think that just kind of changed everything.
No, absolutely. I want to write a book one day. I'm not going to lie. And, I love talking to other authors because it always just like keeps it on my heart and on my mind. You know what I mean? With your book, Never Alone, what was the hardest part in that whole book that you wrote, to put down in words? Because I'm trying to write one myself, and I realized like certain thing, it's like therapy in a way. right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're self-reflecting on thoughts that you've, subconsciously avoided thinking about. Now you're forcing
Mm-hmm.
yourself to think about it. And there's certain things that are kind of easy. And you're like, oh yeah, this is what happened. It's all coming back to me. And there's other things where like, I can't even put it into words. Was there any part of your book where you felt that way?
Absolutely. And I think, it's worth noting that, my full-time job is being a therapist. I have a master's in social work and I practice every day. I see, 7 to 8 patients. And so I can't give advice and recommendations if I'm not willing to do it myself. And part of that, a lot of times, is working with patients with trauma, asking them to unpack and talk about, those things that maybe are very deep. And so I think for me in the book, honestly, chapter 1, I go into talking about my relationship with my father, who's very absent. He was a severe alcoholic. My memories of him as a child are visiting him in rehab and, my parents getting divorced and then him disappearing. And so if we were going to talk about loneliness, I had to go all the way back to where it began, having that absence in my life. And that was hard. And after the first round of edits went through, my father got sick and I ended up having to go, end his, care because, things were not good and, he passed away. And so I had to, it was harder than I thought, right? So then I had to go back into the book and kind of write about that experience, but it was also very healing. So for me, it was probably the most, traumatic part of writing this book, really, really sharing that vulnerable side. But I also feel like that's where we grow within each other. We don't want that facade of like superficial,
So yeah, I read that, that part of your book about your father, about him being an alcoholic. And I struggled with drinking myself for a
Mm-hmm.
while. Not now. I haven't drank in like 5 years now. But I really could empathize with you and your father, reading that. And I have kids and I don't ever want them to feel the way you were describing the way you
Mm-hmm.
felt. So like as a father, it helped me to read that. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I have something similar, like something painful in my life that, I haven't really faced myself too much. And that is my stepmom and me, we stopped talking for like the better part of like 10 years
Mm-hmm.
because my dad divorced he's on his third wife. This is complicated. So he's on his third wife, but that second wife raised me for a long time, right? Like starting from age 2. And then the families, she apparently cheated on him. And so it was our family versus your family kind of situation.
Very messy.
And it got very, very messy to the max. It became their identity, to the
Mm-hmm.
max. And so I thought I had to pick sides, and so I picked my dad's side who raised me. And I felt the need to not talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she became a nurse, which was her dream. And she's always very strict and very healthy and all these things. But somewhere along the lines that fell off. And when she became that nurse, that gave her access to certain medications. So she was drinking, she was taking pain medications, and she died from that suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just like, it was like I never had that talk. I kind of took that for granted. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk to her when I'm ready, when I'm there. And I never got to have that talk. And that's really painful. But if memory serves me, you did have opportunities to speak with your father, right?
Mm-hmm. I did. So, I did go visit him when I was 17. We had a very not close relationship, but one where we communicated often. I was married to my husband, who's active duty Coast Guard, when I was 22. We were married young. And there was a period there where my dad was completely sober and it was wonderful. And then I'll never forget, I was literally holding my son, so I must have been 26, and he called me completely drunk. Like, I mean, it was obvious. He was slurring his words, and then he lied about it. And I looked down at my son and I was like, I'm not doing this again. I'm not going to perpetuate this cycle. And so I ended. Now, the only thing that I did for him was that I continued allowing him to be on my Facebook. And if he asked for photos of my kids, once I had my daughter too, I always sent photos to him. He always had my address. He could send stuff, not that he ever did. And when he got sick, that was the first time. So it was the first time in a decade that I got on the phone with him to tell him I loved him, to tell him I hoped, and I'd be praying, for his healing and for peace. And I'm so glad I did that, because it went really fast, and to go from not, having any kind of relationship with someone to having to make the call on FaceTime to end, life support. It was a lot. It really was. But I'm so grateful I was able to go out there, because I remember my husband asking me, he's like, "Are you going to go?" And I was like, "No." This was after I got the news. But when I got the call that it was going to happen, I was literally in Hobby Lobby, of course. If you're going to break down in the Christian, store where they all are around you, because I was just a puddle on the floor. And that's when I realized it was impacting me more than I realized, or I thought it would. But getting out there, and I mean, I'm not going to drop names, but like spending time with his former wife's children, I realized I had it pretty good not having him in my life, as they were sharing stories and the things that they went through with his drinking and the impact. And I could see the impact rippling through their children. So the fact that I had said no, and the fact that my mom, when I was younger, you don't know, kind of like when you were talking about your story with your stepmom, kids tend to blame themselves. They have this internal dialogue. I have to pick sides. I have to whatever. So maybe in my mind, even though I didn't realize it was her fault or my fault that he left, right? I had this, it just wasn't true. But now looking back, I'm so grateful. Like, I know now that he didn't have our address and phone number because my mom was scared. She was trying to prevent us from knowing what was going on. She always just told us that he was sick. But had I had him in my life, I don't know that I would be where I am today, because I see how my stepbrothers and sisters, how their lives turned out, because trauma impacts people. It tends to, your risks are higher for substance abuse, for certain behaviors that, really don't make for a successful life, unfortunately. So it's really, really hard. And then in terms of your stepmom, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I can't help but play therapist. Even though you didn't get that closure to have that conversation, I would encourage you to write a letter. There's something really, really healing in getting those words and those thoughts out, even if she can't read it, just having it out on paper, just a thought.
No, I love that. And I believe I have talked to a therapist, and she did recommend that. I haven't done it yet. Full transparency. I kind of want to do it. I want to do it when I've never been to her gravesite. So when that happens, when I'm able to do that, I feel like that's the time I'm going to do it. So I'll let you know how that goes. Second question. Did your experience with your father lead to you being a therapist today?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Wanting to help people. My mother is an extremely hard worker. Like, her work ethic is like no other. And like, that is a piece that I have taken from her. She's an avid reader. I wrote a book because of her. My love affair with books started because of her. All of that is because of her. But I also picked up some traits that weren't so great, and that was like thinking I needed to save the world and save everybody in it. My mom has a tendency to try and fix people. I became a fixer, and that was, detrimental in my early years. I was lucky enough. My husband, I met him when I was 19 years old, and he is, when you think about military bearing and having the shiny boots, the bills paid on time, just the it was all put together. I had piercings everywhere, tattoos, I had done a year of community college, and then I was like, I don't know, I was very up in the air. And he was such a strong influence to say, there's nothing stopping you. You can do whatever you wanted. And I needed that, even coming from a good family. I needed an outsider to tell me that. And so, going back, I knew whatever I chose to do, it was going to be helping people in some way. So my undergrad was psychology. I want to understand the mind. I want to know why people do what they do. Behaviors are for a reason. People, when we think about just how society, for example, looks at people who are addicted to substances, it's not very favorable, right? But I can see that person, I can vividly imagine what their baby pictures look like, what their growing up years were like. And there was a switch somewhere where mistakes were made and a path was chosen that, I want to humanize people. And that's, why I pursued social work, because, I could have become a licensed professional counselor or marriage therapy, whatever. But social work gave me a broader view. a systems theory. I'm not going to treat someone with anxiety that's telling me that they can't pay their bills and just validate their feelings. I'm going to go out and find food pantries. I'm going to find local services to help support them in their time of need while also giving them the space to share, because that is what real, helping hand up looks like. So yeah, it's absolutely influenced, who I became, both good and bad, in some of those troubled years.
Right. Yeah, I could see how like the more you learn, the more like you kind of think about your own behaviors too. At some point, you're like, wait a second, why do I see the world this way? You kind of start self-analyzing the more you learn, I bet. I wanted to be one at one point too, and I kind of am one now as a podcaster. So I think I've kind of fulfilled that desire, right? Like that desire to communicate, to hear stories, like that's fulfilling to me in that realm. So third question for someone who, or any potential authors out there, which in the military, that's become like a huge thing. Like, I think it's because it's so easy to get one published now, right? Like before, it was just kind of complicated and maybe it was more costly. And I feel like now it's kind of been a bit more streamlined. So people have a better access to getting one out there for sure. But in the military, it's like, I got peers, master sergeants like me who have 2 books out. Got them in the mail. Shout out to Sidney Sullivan. Like he just sent me these. I didn't even know he had these.
That's awesome.
So he's got this one, and then he's got this one, and I'm just like,
awesome.
I'm like, dude, you're killing it. Like you're just like me. You got a family. You're a master sergeant. You're active duty, and you got 2 books out. Like what? Who are you? And so my third question is for any aspiring authors out there who are like, how do I get started? How do I actually make this happen? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. It's different now than it was. You can self-publish. Amazon makes it really easy if you want to go that route. The other thing I would tell people is not to discount themselves. What I didn't know until I got into this is that when you retain a literary agent, they do not get paid until they get you a deal. So, put some of your work together, make a one sheet of who you are, like if your platform, if you have a platform, and start, looking for an agent, someone to represent you. I got really lucky, and I mean this sincerely. The nonprofit that I run, our first campaign landed us on the Kelly Clarkson show. It landed us on the Today Show. So our platform was there, and publishing houses will look for that, like platform, writing ability, like they look at all of that. And a very good friend of mine already had a published book under Moody. And at this point I had been writing, because I write for most of the military publications out there. I love storytelling, love hearing from veterans and military spouses and being able to share their stories with the world. It's super impactful for me. And so I was already writing, and she's like, you have a book in you. Like, I really think you can do this. Put this together. I'm going to get this with Moody. Like, I really think they'll pick this up. And I went to the meeting thinking, no way. I'm this nobody. Like, it's not going to happen, And they said yes. And so I got really lucky. But that would be the advice, is like, don't, get, down if your first manuscript is turned away, because most people get a lot of no's. Megan, the friend I mentioned, her manuscript that she first submitted got turned down multiple times before she landed a deal with Moody. And so don't get discouraged. Absolutely utilize Amazon and self-publish if you want to get it out there and start things. Because a lot of people are speaking, right? And so it's great to have your written work behind you. And if that's how you have to get started, that's great. Do it. There's nothing wrong with that. We are an online age right now. The days of like, I'm old. I'm the elder millennial. I want to go in the bookstore. I want to sniff the books and hold them. But people
I do like the smell of books and coffee.
Yeah.
Like that it does hit different, I will say.
Right? It's so different. It's a whole vibe, but the majority, like the younger generation, they want to click a button and order a book. So, that would be my advice, is if you're really serious about it and you want to pursue traditional publishing, get yourself an agent. Look for one that's going to represent what you're trying to do and do well. Military specific, there's a deep need for our community stories. They want to hear from us, because we're not just speaking to the rest of our community. Civilians want to learn from us. Our life and our lifestyle is so different. It's why you see these veterans going to these big corporate conferences and speaking, to teams of people. They want to hear from us. And so I think this is a pivotal time for us to use our voices.
No, absolutely. And kind of in a similar vein, like there's a lot of veteran podcasters now, like tremendous amount, and a lot of active duty ones, and that's kind of rare. That's kind of a new thing. And for me, it all changed, at least for the Air Force side, during COVID, when we were encouraged to connect online. From that point on, it became more acceptable. Before that, I don't think it would have. I think there would have been a lot more hurdles. And don't get me wrong, I still had hurdles. You know what I mean? I'm talking to like generals, and my boss is like, who are you talking to? Did you like what? Are you allowed to do that? So it still was a bit odd at first. But I feel like me and the other peers of mine that are doing this, we're like paving the way to show like the benefit, the connection, and just the scale of the outreach is just unparalleled. And so I just recently got to go to AFSA and podcast and kind of train other people and create more podcasters, which was like really fun for me. And so, yeah, the veteran authors, the veteran podcasters, like it's really cool to be serving in this time when this stuff is more accepted, as a culture.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. So you passed the 3 questions, the hero's gauntlet. You crushed it. You did fantastic. So thank you. And I usually ask for topics, so I'm going to look at those right now. Your first topic is your childhood trauma with your father. We talked a little bit about that. The second one you put down is your struggles as a military spouse. And the third one that you have is the clinical implications for loneliness. Right? And I'm guessing a lot of those are in your book, Never Alone. And the full title, just so I'm getting it right, is Never Alone, Ruth, the Modern Military Spouse.
And the God Who Goes With Us.
And yes, and the God Who Goes With Us. I love the title, and I want to show you this. I'm going to recommend you a book. So if you got ADHD like me, I love audiobooks, but I'll tell you, with the Bible, and I am religious, I could not read it. Like it was just so hard for me to like get what it's saying and what is the message here. And that was hard for me. And so like this Bible recap was great. I did read about Ruth. There's not many female like main characters in the Bible, and that's what makes the story of Ruth like so unique. And there's like a lot to unpack in her story. There's like a bunch of messages, and that's what I love about the Bible as well, is like you get the overall message, but then there's like sub messages in there, that there's even messages that like tie into the future. When Jesus comes, like there's even like stuff about that. It's just wild, like how deep these stories really go. And so as we're talking about your book here, what led you to Ruth? What stood out about her to title your book around her?
So I knew that I was going to share my personal experiences, because I can't write about this, talking to veteran and military spouses without sharing my journey. I knew I was going to bring in clinical stuff because I, obviously am a clinician. But when it came to figuring out what scripture I was going to use, Ruth has really always been one of my favorite books of the Bible. I love their story. And I just remember rereading that line, "Where you go, I go," over coffee. And there's so much in that. Like I could see, obviously, my service member, like no questions asked. Hey, we're moving. Hey, we're moving. Hey, we're doing this. Hey, we're doing that. Picking up your life. And like, we're going to do this. And I believe in you and I believe in us. But also, the friendships that I've formed, no matter what, like when I think of my closest friends, they are my roots. Right. And so it made perfect sense. And if you've read the book of Ruth, that in the end, she does, remarry, and their child is of the lineage of Jesus. So without that story, without Ruth, who was a pagan woman, who in that moment said, "Your God is my God. Where you go, I go." In that moment, without that happening, do we have Jesus? So it just makes you question everything, and it makes you realize that even in the deepest pit of your most terrible season, God is always with us, And I can look back, and I share in the book the story of my grandmother. we talked about my childhood. It wasn't the greatest. There are a lot of things I left out, just because there's certain people who are still alive and I'm trying to be respectful. But the reality is I was mostly raised by my grandparents. So my grandmother was my best friend. And so when she started sliding into dementia, there are all sorts of things that happened. But I hung up the phone one day and I turned to my husband and I said, I have to go home. Like, I have to go home. He didn't question me on it, nothing. I'd go home. I was able to make it to a doctor's appointment for her. And I kept telling the doctor something's not right. And he, helped me push other family members to get her into the ER. The long and short of it is she had a tumor. She had cancer. And, they had to remove it. She was going to go into hospice. It was going to be a long, unfortunately painful death for her. And she was losing everything. But we were alone for a moment and she knew me. And it was the first time she knew who I was in a year and a half. That was a gift. She did ultimately pass after I left to go back home because, I had a daughter to take care of. It was still, it was a whole thing. I was on the phone waiting for her to pick up. I was checking in when she had passed away. The nurses had gone to find her, but she had a roommate in that room. And the roommate reported to the nurse that she kept saying, I'm going home. I'm going home. And that's how she passed away, saying, I'm going home. So I take that as she was going home to heaven. Like her time was done. So when I think about Ruth and I think about that journey, the lessons and the things that we can glean from that, it really does come back to, recognize that there's a plan and we don't always have control in it. And especially when you factor in our lives in the military, there's a whole lot of things we don't freaking control. Like it's a lot. But I think when we can lean on our faith and each other and community, that's where we come out the other side.
Absolutely. That was an amazing answer. And you're making me want to go back and read it again. But one thing that really touched me that you were saying is even the dark moments led to something. Like there was a plan all along, although you can't see it because you're living it, right? You don't have that bird's eye view of everything, of the map. But you're right. It all it's just one story, but without her, without that happening, Jesus wouldn't exist. It had to happen. Even the tough times had to happen. And, it kind of reminds me of when I got here to Egg. Okay, so when I was at Whiteman, my last base, I left there absolutely killing it, pinnacle of my career. The highest accolades I could have ever achieved, the best experience I could have ever asked for. And then when I got here, it was the exact opposite. It was a lot of stress, a lot of workplace issues, a lot of hard times that had me questioning okay, I'm not as good as I thought. It was very humbling for one, right? But, I'm kind of disappointed that I did lose a bit of faith in myself during that time. I will admit. But now that I'm where I'm at now and the doors that have opened for me, it's very validating to know those hard times, sometimes you have to go through them to get to this other opportunity, and that they truly are temporary, although they don't feel like it in the moment.
100%. And I mean, I don't regret or want to change any part of my story. The majority of patients that I see have a heavy trauma history. I do not think I would be able to connect the way that I do without having gone through what I've gone through.
Right.
I just don't. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to have this horrible traumatic past to heal from by any means, but it gives me a deeper level of understanding. I can look, at the teenager that's struggling and say, hey, I was in dropout prevention. It's a miracle that I graduated high school. And yes, I went on to earn a master's. Hey, I lived, with, substance abusers and, the things that you don't even want to imagine. And I'm here. I'm not saying it's okay, but I get you. And so I honestly am grateful every day. Obviously I'm on the other side of it. It's a lot better when you make it to the other side and you can use
you
it.
worked for it. You did work for it though. You went through it, and when it comes to trauma and tough times, you can either let it crush you or you can let it empower you. It's always going to crush you right out the gate, obviously. Right.
Totally.
That's why it's important to have a strong support system. But going forward, and it's happened to me too. It's become like that problem became like your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've done that. I've done that. I've been that person where like I had a chip on my shoulder and I was always just frustrated and agitated and making life hard for people because I took it on as my identity.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm kind of through that and I've matured a bit with that, I see other people doing that. You know what I mean? I see them taking that on as their identity. And the fact that I've been through it, it is a blessing when you have that experience where I can take that person in and be like, look, I know what you're doing. I know how you're feeling. You feel like everyone's against you, and it's not true. You're making it up in your head and just having some like heart to heart. But it's because, I've been through it myself. So there is a way where that trauma can empower you. And then when you start really helping other people, that's like the last part of the healing process, in my opinion, from the trauma, is when you're able to start actually helping other people with it. It kind of validates, your purpose in life.
Totally. You turn that pain into purpose. It doesn't go away, right? I do a lot of trauma counseling. It's like, I can't wave this magic wand. You're not going to forget. But when those memories resurface, if I've done my work well, if you've done your work, they're not going to bring that same response. And one day you're going to be able to use this for good. That is my goal and that is my hope.
Definitely. One more question on the book before I move on to the next topic here. You've been invited on all these platforms, right? Like I said, I'm talking to a celebrity here. So I feel like.
Please.
What about the book? Because again, I'm 25% through it. I absolutely love it. And if you ever make it an audiobook, I will get the 100%.
It is an audiobook.
It is? Oh, then I have no excuse.
You listen, the lady, quick story. I was salty that they didn't pick my voice for it, but fine. I got over it. They did not.
Wait, did you actually record it or did they test you first?
They tested me for my own book and I was salty about it. And then I was like, you know what, Jessica, this is me always trying to find the positive. Do you really have time to be buried in a closet? Because you have to soundproof everything and record this over your Christmas break with your kids. Is this what you want to do? And I was like, you know what, this is a blessing in disguise. Well, long story short, her voice is phenomenal. I wanted her to convey so deeply for the reader to feel like they were sitting at a table with me having coffee. And she messaged me out of the blue on Instagram. And she was, hey, you don't know me. I was the voice actor for your book. And I want you to know I had just left a really abusive relationship. And your book got me through it. And if it sounds like I was getting choked up at the end of it, I was. We're now friends on Instagram or followers, whatever.
Oh my God, that is wild.
How wild is that? And so she's a civilian, nothing to do with like our, so yes, it is an audiobook. Her voice is fantastic. I've told her that all my books going forward, she will be my person because she got me.
Wow. So like you didn't get picked, which that is kind of funny. I'm be real. Like it's
in my freaking book.
You're like, wait, what did you? I'm not picked. Wait, what? But but again, that setback was for another reason. It was for this woman to sit down and have to read the book, right? Because she needed to hear that. Isn't that just crazy coincidence?
It's not coincidence. I always call it a God thing. I'm like, all right, okay, I get it.
I call it God winking at you.
Oh, I like that.
He's like, eh? And you're like, oh, okay. I see what you did there.
Right.
Right. No, that's amazing. But yeah, the question, I did have a question in there, and it is,
you were like squirrel.
What about, in your opinion, the book has been highly successful. You've been invited on all these platforms. Everyone loves it. I've only read 25% of it, so I can't speak to it myself completely yet. And I will listen to the audiobook now that I know it exists because I love audiobooks. So I can do chores at the same time. And I'll give it a full review. You have my word. What about the book has just had people just so that amazing response that you've had where they have such high praises for it to the point where you felt imposter syndrome because you're like, wait a minute. I thought I was like no one. And now suddenly like I'm being invited to all these places. Like what is happening? What do you think about the book is touching people to that extent?
When I think about the feedback I've gotten, like from strangers, I think, because I love getting messages and hearing from people, because again, I was like, is anybody going to read this? Like when you finish it, I'm like, did I do a good job? Like you question everything. unless you're a narcissist, then you don't. I am not. But I think what makes this different, my writing style is very much like talking to a friend. And so, but also like being real with people. And so I think that was the best feedback that I got, is having people say, oh my God, it's like you're in my head. You know exactly what I'm going through right now. Like I started going back to church because of you. I got into therapy because of you. Stuff like that is super meaningful to me. I will never not respond to people or talk to people, who have questions. Seeing military spouse groups start doing Bible study with my book, it just does not feel real, because again, like it's not me. It's not who I think I am, right? We all have these different, views of ourselves. But yeah, I would say that, like, it's just like hearing that. I think that's what it is. I think it's the tone I write in, hopefully. And then the right message, because it's interesting. My book came out in March 7th. See? And the Surgeon General in May said that loneliness is a mental health epidemic. So, right time too.
Yeah. So you got some Holy Spirit just working through your message. Is what
a little
I'm
bit. I'm gonna do that. Did you see that lady on whatever game show that was, where she was singing "Holy Spirit, activate" and like clapping and like got everybody going? Every time I hear Holy Spirit, that's going through my head. It lives there rent free.
If I make a trailer for this episode, I'll make sure to include that clip.
Oh, so good.
All right, so I want to hear about your husband. This dude who's just getting after it. He's squared away. He's in the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
How long has he been in?
22 years.
22 years. I'm at 19, so I'm right there with him. But dang, 22. My man's getting after it. He's squared away. He's doing the bills. He swept you off your feet at 19.
There you go. We've been together since I was 19. Completely. Right? His story is very similar. Divorced parents, semi-rough childhood, because his growing up years weren't the greatest. He only got to see his dad couple of months here and there in summers, and so very, very different. He actually was JROTC his whole high school career, and he failed a math class because there were certain extracurricular activities he wanted to engage in, because he turned 18 early. And so he was actually in the Army National Guard, and that contract got canceled because of failing this math class. So he got a GED and, tried to go to college. It wasn't for him. And then he enlisted in the Coast Guard. He was on a plane to his A school, or what you guys would call your tech school, on 9/11. Landed in San Francisco, California, and then those planes hit, hours later.
I can't even imagine. After I joined, I thought about that. And because I went through basic and I had the whole experience, and I went through tech school, and I remember thinking, like, what would that have been like to like have been in or knew when that happened? That had to have been a crazy time.
It was nuts. He was immediately on big ships, like, there's all sorts of stuff going down, in Haiti with their civil war. It was just a really nuts few years, right? But again, everything happens for a reason. If he hadn't failed that math class and still been in the Army National Guard, he would have been deployed with that unit to Afghanistan. Instead, he was in the Coast Guard. He got stationed in my hometown 4 years into his service, and we met. But he's also a product of, like, you need to get stuff done. Like, I'm not going to let these hard times in my life dictate who I become. He's a command master chief now. He's an E9 with a GED.
Dang, he's an E9? Wild.
Very wild.
At
an aviation unit, as a boat guy.
Oh, dang. Yeah, he is getting after it. I just knew it. I just felt it. I don't know how. What's his name? We didn't say his name yet.
His name is Scott Manfre.
Scott Manfre. Well, hey, Scott, if you're listening to this later on, you're getting after it. You're crushing it. And I'm proud of you. Let him know I said that.
I will.
But let's talk about you being the spouse. That's always different, right? I was such an idiot when I was an airman. I really was. I had a lot of learning to do. I was just an absolute moron.
You had to grow
And
up.
I did. But I remember thinking, like, when I'd go to retirement ceremonies as an airman, they'd always like thank their spouse, and I'd always be like, what did they do? Like, I know that sounds so bad. And I know that now. I know that now. But like as a young kid, I'm like, what? Okay,
You're forgiven.
they're just that chilling at home. Like, what? I don't get it. Okay. But now that I've gone through it and I truly know the sacrifice that spouses make, and it's absolutely tremendous. But I think aside from that, what I don't hear as often that I think is equally as important is that they're like the spouse and the family is the fuel for the service member to keep going and to get through any hard times. Like it fuels the purpose that we have, right? That's if I didn't have them, but my life before my wife and kids, I really didn't have a purpose. They helped me find that. And so I think equally as important as the sacrifice is, y'all are like the jet fuel that make us fearless and get out there and do what we need to do. And so I think spouses are the other half of the coin for our service members. They're so important. Without them, without their support, without them being on board, none of this would be happening. So I'd love to hear your experiences as a military spouse.
Well, the Coast Guard is obviously a smaller branch of service. So for me, sometimes it was unfortunately it was being discounted, not necessarily by the Coast Guard members, but by other branches of like, what, what's that? Is that the reserves? Like not understanding the purpose. That was always hard. Employment is really rough. I would not tell people I was a military spouse. And I remember vividly getting a job I really, really wanted. I think it was like a month later, I finally told my supervisor that I was a military spouse, and he flat out said, if I had known that, I wouldn't have hired you. So like that's the reality, having
because
to
he thinks you're gonna like move and he's gonna have to backfill you.
Yeah, we're not. Why would we want to invest in you? Because
Right.
you're just going to move. There was a leader in the Coast Guard that I became close with, and I interviewed him one day, and he said, if we don't take care of the family, we're not going to have a family. And what you said is so meaningful. I truly do feel, we are a foundation. Like as a human race, we weren't meant to live alone, right? Having a partner. I mean, if you look at statistics, longevity, happier life, better mental health, all that happens when you have a partner that you can do life with. And so if we're not serving that family and that partner well, what's going to happen? Is that service member going to be ready for whatever mission there is? No, they're not, And so it goes hand in hand. And I think that we're seeing in today's military a complete shift. There is a focus on the family. Spouses are speaking up. We did not speak up. I am so proud, of the advocates that have come forward to talk about these issues and, discuss the things that we need to continue doing this, because it's hard, but I can't imagine what it's going to look like to not be a military spouse. I started dating my husband at 19. I was married to him at 22. By the time he retires, I will have been a Coast Guard spouse longer than a civilian.
Gosh, that's crazy.
What is my life going to look like? Am I going to feel a loss of identity? I think I will, but, it's just, the assumption is there, especially from some of the younger people. I remember sitting, I don't know if the Air Force has something similar when folks make E9, but we have what's called the Chief's Call to Initiation, CCTI, and the Navy, it's Chief's, this whole thing, basically fraternity for them, but it's very meaningful. And I remember sitting there heavily pregnant with my daughter in 2017, and I'm eating, and the chief, hey, we start like communicating, having dinner, and he's like, so what do? Are you stay-at-home mom? And I just remember internally being like, is that, am I just a baby machine? Like, is that my life? And I said, no, like I have a son in school. I'm finishing graduate school and I work full-time remotely. And he was just kind of like, but that's the persona, not just from service members sometimes, but from, society as a whole. And the reality is, if you look at the statistics, military spouses compared to their civilian peers, we have higher education, rates, like in terms of like higher levels of education, but then we're rocking a 24% unemployment rate. So, I mean, that's a huge issue. Childcare. I mean, I can go on and on. Life, though, I'm really excited for the military spouses coming through now. having the things that they have, the access that they have, the advocates that they have that we didn't have. And I think that's what makes me happy, knowing that when he retires, it's okay. Like, they've got it. Like, I don't feel like they're going to have it as rough as we did.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? To make things better than how you found it. And I'll tell you what blew my mind with certain spouses was when there's a few conferences the Air Force has. There's two in particular. There's Air Force Association in DC, and then there's the Air Force Sergeants Association, which moves around. The last one that I was just at in Dallas. And they typically have, like, every branch has a spouse of the year. They have their own annual awards, essentially. So every branch has the spouse of the year, and then one of them gets picked for, like, the top DoD, like, spouse of the year. And I gotta say, meeting them has, like, blown my mind. Like, these are, like, the most talented spouses I've ever met. And they've made more change and more impact than most airmen or people serving have. Like, that's the crazy part. So, like, Kristen Christie's one, Heba Abdullah, she, like, was, like, working for a congressman in Colorado, like, writing policy.
They're both very good friends of mine.
Oh, so you're familiar with them?
Yes, we're both friends. So both of them were the Air Force Spouse of the Year for the Armed Forces insurance program, and I was the Coast Guard Spouse of the Year in 2019. So we're all connected. They are powerhouses, the two of them.
Okay, so you are familiar with the award. Because if you weren't, I was like, you totally got to go for it now. But you've already won it.
Bless you. But yeah, they're wonderful. They are, both of them, hands down.
Yes, and I just saw Kristen Christie at AFSA. She just goes, like, on her own dime. She'll to meet people, to spread the word, to be there for people. She'll just make it happen. She'll make it a point to do that. And yeah, they're pretty incredible, as are you. So I'm so glad you know them and you're in that circle. Because if you weren't, I was like, oh, I'm about to blow your mind.
These ladies.
Right. Like, and it's funny because I set up a Catalyst of Growth Summit, like, speaking event. I think I had some stickers down here somewhere for it. It's basically like a TED Talk that, Eglin Air Force Base put on. And, I got brought on the team to find speakers because they're like, you do a podcast, you talk to, like, clearly you've talked to people who like to talk. Can you get us speakers? And I did. But they were all female. I didn't purposely do that, but, like, there's just so many women, like, absolutely crushing it, that all my submissions were female. And it wasn't until then where I was like, dang, like, there are so many women out there, and spouses and service members that are just, like, next level. And, I was just so proud of them. And that event, was incredible. If we have it again, we're going to try to have it again next year. And if we do, I'll definitely give you the details to that. If that's something you want to participate in. The only Coast Guard member I've ever spoke to was Ashley Leppert.
Okay.
And she has a whole book out, and she's in the Florida area. That's how I met her. She came on the Catalyst of Growth Summit to do a speaking event. But yeah, she was, like, recognized by, like, President Trump when he was still in office for just I want to say it was Hurricane Harvey. I want to say, but she basically, as a female Coast Guard, airman, saving all these lives from, like, the helicopter, dropping the basket down, pulling it up, like, literal infants stranded in water, that she took care of. And so she has a whole book about that. And so I have a high respect for Coast Guard after, hearing all the ins and outs of what they're tasked to do and how dangerous it can actually get. It definitely raised my respect for the Coast Guard, just clearly just knowing their mission, just hearing it for the first time, was a really cool experience. So I definitely want to give a shout out to the Coast Guard for saving so many lives. And they do deploy too. I've met some that did deploy too. Like, they're tasked mostly with protecting Americans, but they do also deploy.
Yeah, absolutely. I know quite a few of them. Some that were finally recognized with some awards that took years. Like, I think one guy, it took almost a decade for the Coast Guard to recognize what he did in Afghanistan. But even, my husband was on ships, he's out 2 months, home 2 months, and they're doing some pretty crazy stuff, not just with, SAR rescue cases, but with drugs. Like, I'd show up to, pick him up because he's home. It's great. I'm holding my son, and the next thing you know, they're offloading prisoners, blindfolded. It's just, you just don't know what you're going to get. Their mission is definitely multifaceted. I'm biased for sure, but just to give like your listeners an inkling, when it comes to like, say, the Air Force, for example, you guys have a job for every person that's doing something on that aircraft, whereas, there's I can't think of the name of the word. You'd probably know. It's like Air Maintainer of the Year, something like that. It's a big award, and because we have a unit in the DC area, they respond first, then it's like Navy, then Air Force, whatever, like to warn, whatever. And the guy was coming around to like ask questions, and he's like, "Where's your so and so guy?" So he's like, he raised his hand, must have been 7 times, and he's like, "Wait, you do all this? Like, we have 7 people. Granted, a lot of your aircraft is bigger, but like just." That's the cards that the Coast Guard has dealt. This is the mission. We only have so many people to do it, and we're going to get it done. And it's just, I'm very proud to be a Coast Guard spouse, very proud of the work that they do.
No, that's amazing. I love that. And you're a great Coast Guard spouse at that. You've already won that award. I didn't even know, you didn't even bring that up. It's not even in the questionnaire. That's like a huge
I'm old.
Okay, so our last topic, and I'm really curious about, what you have to say about this, but it is clinical implications for loneliness. And I feel like loneliness is a big part of your story and the book. What's your thoughts on the clinical implications for loneliness? Why is that important to you?
I don't think, like, when people hear that word, they're just like, oh, they're just lonely. They just need friends. But I mean, you could have a million friends and still feel lonely. I think it really comes down to that connection and that sense of belonging and community. And in terms of like clinical implications, I mean, it leads to depression, leads to, going down a rabbit hole that is not good. I mean, statistically, it's worse for you than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. It impacts your heart. Because it just, when you think about depression as a whole, you're going to have higher levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And when you have that running through your body, there's just a lot. And so It's worth unpacking. And so there have been a couple of sassy veterans that I've come across that have been like, well, those spouses knew what they signed up for, or comments like that. And it's like, yes. I knew when I was marrying my husband that he was going to be Coast Guard for life. I was dedicating the next, like a very large chunk of my life to be at the mercy of the needs of this nation. Totally cool. I didn't know how hard it was going to be to leave my family behind, to miss out on everything, because we typically can only go home, once a year. I didn't know how hard it was going to be to make friends, because a lot of times, especially in the Coast Guard, we're in smaller units, depending on where you go. And sometimes you're not next to military at all. And civilians, while they like to hang, the yellow ribbon and be patriotic, a lot of them aren't so welcoming because they know you're going to move in 2 or 3 years and they don't want to invest in you. Finding churches even is really hard. They don't want to, connect too deep or give you a ministry or have you super involved because you're going to leave. And so it is a very lonely existence. Military spouses have higher rates of dependence on alcohol, other substances, higher rates of depression and anxiety. And so did we know what we were saying I do too? No, we didn't. And so there are a lot of implications. And I think the whole world got a taste of what loneliness looks like and isolation looks like during the pandemic. So I think there's a whole lot more empathy, I guess, if you will, people, going through it. And clearly, if the Surgeon General is going to name it as a epidemic of sorts. So yeah, it hurts your health, hurts everything.
So can you run me through a time where, because clearly it means something to you, so I feel like you've been through it. Was there a time where like you were at your absolute loneliness and that's kind of what came to mind when you were writing this book, something that you wanted to point out and share with others?
I mean, there was a couple of times. I would say the worst was like the first move away from home, because this was early days. This is before texting was a thing. Like you're still paying for long distance calls, all that stuff. I moved with my husband. We got somewhat situated, and then he went to go report to the boat And then he disappeared for 3 days. He's gone, just gone. I've got no internet. I don't have a job yet. I mean, I was just like, I don't know where he is. They didn't call me. It was the worst. And I mean, and then that became my life, because when you are on a patrol boat off of Cape Canaveral and there are migrant, interdictions and drug interdictions, like, I mean, it was very, very lonely. I was completely by myself in a city where I knew no one, 3 hours from family. I did pull myself out of it, because it was like, okay, I can't live in these dirty clothes and watch reruns of Blockbuster Grey's Anatomy, because that's how old I am, over and over again.
You say
I got to figure
Blockbuster?
this out. I did. I was renting Blockbuster, eating ice cream and sad. It was just not cute.
So, there are more tools to communicate today, but I'm sure people still feel that way.
Yeah.
I did as a service member. That's a whole nother story. So like, I get the loneliness, I missed home. That was brutal for me. That was absolutely brutal. And side note, you're right. You did not know what you're signing up for. So I hate anyone who says that, because like, every rank comes with different responsibilities. Every new base has a different mission. There's no way you can predict what that looks like until you've gone through it. You know what I mean? You just don't know. It's a crapshoot. You have no idea. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who says that, no, that's not true. But, if there's any spouses out there who potentially Google searched, loneliness as a military spouse, and they stumble across this episode and they're looking for that little nugget of what steps can I take to get out of this? What would you tell that person?
So for me personally, I heal my best when I'm serving others. No surprise, just given what we've talked about. I would encourage them to find a way to make it not about them. Go to your local animal shelter, go to your, local domestic violence shelter, homeless shelter, serve for a little bit. It is very true. There's a helper's high. You will get a surge of feel-good hormones. It's not going to fix your problems or fix your loneliness, but maybe it's going to put you in a space to then go back to what you're dealing with and find solutions for it, because you're helping someone else that's really going through it. I always encourage talk therapy. Find a therapist that you connect with. That means you might have to fire one. And I will tell you that when I start with my patients, I make it abundantly clear that if we don't connect and you don't feel that connection within a session or two, tell me. There should be zero ego in mental health. My goal is then to refer out and find someone that they're going to mesh with, because you cannot bare your soul to a stranger. You just can't. And so talk therapy for sure. There are so many resources out there now with, just what we have in social media. There are so many therapists that are like pretty famous, on TikTok and Instagram, that offer really great insight for certain things. I'm a big fan of journaling your feelings, utilizing things like exercise, which produces happy endorphins. But I think recognizing that you're not alone in what you're struggling with. And I love this book. Ken Falk and a couple of other guys wrote it. It's called Struggle Well. And the reality is there's no escaping life stressors, problems, loneliness. You can't escape it. It's a part of our journey as human beings, but we do have the power to change it and get out of it, right? And so I think there's an endless supply of tools that you can use. Reach out to me. I love, hearing from people and offering different opportunities, finding connections. I don't just, write and work as a therapist. I also, am a case manager for the Coast Guard Mutual Assistance, which is our relief society. And so I communicate with all the other relief societies. And so sometimes there's a need there. Maybe it's financial. The Blue Star Family Survey, year in and year out, financial stressors are at the top of the list. We're hearing a lot about food insecurity. We struggle as a military community, and that's okay. So, reach out for help, serve others as a way to kind of reset yourself. I know that, it's oversaid, but it's true. It's okay not to be okay. We're all going to be there. I've been there. My life is not perfect. I wish I could, kind of go back and maybe redo some decisions I've made, but you're not your worst day. You're so much more than your worst day. And so I think that would be like the final thought that I have on that.
No, absolutely. And I take loneliness pretty serious as well, because I basically imploded on myself. I was stationed at Kadena in Okinawa. I was on 12s. for a year on night shift, and the isolation, the loneliness, I'd get home and just drink. I didn't know what else to do. I was so disconnected from everything. And then I get to Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, which was like culture shock. I never lived in like the Midwest. I'm from like the DC area. And so that was like even more isolating because I was surrounded by like hunters and fishermen and like, that just wasn't me. So I was like an oddball, even in my section at work. And I started drinking more, and yeah, my mental state, I think, affected my physical health. So my thyroid stopped working. I'm on Synthroid to this day. Because my thyroid literally stopped working as a male at like 25. That's like unheard of, but it happened. And once you start Synthroid, that you can't stop taking it at that point. So I still take it. And then the other thing that happened was I got the flu mist, which is the one you snort. It's a live virus, but that almost killed me. I got myocarditis.
Oh my God, that's an infection of the heart, right?
Yes, it's like your heart is attacking itself. There's a virus in there, and your body is killing itself. I don't know I don't know what's going on. I get an EKG, and all of a sudden I'm getting rushed to a hospital. I'm like, what is going on? Like, this is crazy. Like, because I had chest pain and a fever and all that, and they're like, yeah, you have myocarditis. Like, you shouldn't. There's like senior citizens on like the floor of the hospital that I was on. Grown men with heart attacks and stuff, like, and I'm this young kid. Like, what is going on? There's such a red flag, and there's nothing they could do about it. That's the scary part. Like, with that virus, with that particular condition, they just make you comfortable. There's nothing they can do.
That's scary.
It's either gonna go away or it's gonna kill you. That's the two options. And so, that still wasn't my rock bottom. That's a whole nother story. I thought it was, but it wasn't. But all of that, all those health implications that happened to me, I was just not doing good. And my mental state got so low and so poor, and I had so much anxiety all the time that I think it physically almost killed me.
I believe it. I absolutely believe it. It's something that I think people don't necessarily examine as something that can harm you, but it will. Because look at you today. You're not drinking. You have a family. You feel like you have purpose. You're fulfilled in your life, both in and out of the home. Like, it makes a world of difference. And when we think about suicide, obviously it's a topic that's very, relevant in our community. It's also relevant in the civilian community. Very often, if you read the studies of people who survived it, they regretted it immediately. But in that moment, they were hurting so much that they couldn't fathom being on this earth any longer because of that hurt, And I think it's up to us to kind of share our stories. I don't like the word resilient. I use the word grit. I borrowed it from a very good friend of mine because we have it, If we can make it through that moment, that hour, that day, we're going to then pull someone else out of it. I just know it. And so I'm so glad that you feel the way you feel today and that you're able to talk about it. Coming from someone who's still active duty, I think your story is important.
Yes, thank you for that. And that's why I want to write a book, because I want to capture that. I wrote out how I hit rock bottom. I wrote all that out. The part I'm struggling with is how I got out of it. Like, I didn't think that would be a hard thing to like put into words, but it really is, because there's so many layers to how I got out of that one. Statistically, anyone that low would not have made it out. I would have either ended my life or my health would have deteriorated to the point where, my liver failed from drinking or whatever. But I did make it out, and I want to get that right. I want to get that part right, because I know that's the part that people are going to read, and, the people looking for that message, they're going to want to see that answer. And so when I talked to you earlier about like getting caught up on certain parts of the book, that's the part I'm caught up on right now. Is like, how do I put that into words where someone could really like take that and help change their life or their perspective? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I think it's going to be powerful when you're ready.
Absolutely. So I might hit you up for more tips. You know what I'm saying?
Get it. I'm here for it.
I love that. All right. Hey, Jess, you're just incredible person. I mean,
right back at you.
Thank you. but this is your show, so no, nothing on me. But no, the book you wrote with all the trauma right at the beginning, I read about that with your father and the alcoholism, and then just you joining as a military spouse, but then like look where you're at now. Like that's kind of amazing.
Wild.
Yeah, that where you were at, where your head was at, and your life only got harder, yet somehow you became more successful.
Mm-hmm.
You had every reason and every excuse to not write that book, to not get your degree, to not be a therapist, to not help people. You had every excuse in the world, and no one would have batted an eye. They said, you know what, you're right. You got a family, you're getting moved around, your military spouse, got it. We get it. But yet you didn't do that. You somehow got more successful. And I think it's such a testament to, how incredible you are and how many lives that you were able to touch with that perseverance for what makes you, your purpose, your goals. It's so clear that, you're in your element, and you got that Holy Spirit just working through you. You know what I mean? You just got it.
I'm telling you, I think for me, it really does come back to that. It comes back to faith. When I have been at my lowest, I feel like those shining moments of like clarity of following a plan laid out for me are there. I wasn't going to go to graduate school. I thought about it down the road. I had a miscarriage, and it was the worst experience of my life, next to losing my grandmother. And I remember, I guess it was like a month after, I got someone had shared a scholarship opportunity through the National Military Family Association. And I was like, whatever, literally on my phone. I applied for this scholarship for graduate school, shared my story of, miscarrying and blah, blah, blah. And like, I want to help people. It was this whole thing. Didn't even take it seriously. Like I did it on my phone, and I got a $1,000 scholarship. And I turned to my husband and I said, this was my sign. I need to go back to school. I got this without even trying. Like there's something in me. I need to pursue this. And, we did it. We made it happen. So faith is a very, very big part of my life. And I think a big part of why I keep pushing through, even when I'm going, God, I don't want to do this. Like, this is not cool. But, even if you take faith out of it, we do not grow when we stay comfortable. So step into being uncomfortable.
It all starts with that. Like it all has that in common. It's like you take one step towards your purpose takes 1,000 steps towards you.
Mm-hmm.
But without that first step, it never entered your life. You know what I mean? So the taking the chance on yourself, having the faith in yourself, and being okay with doing something new, maybe not getting it perfect, that is so important to unlocking like your potential and opportunity, is taking that chance. For me, and anyone listening to this that's listened to episodes, they know what I'm going to say. It was when I said yes to the honor guard and doing military funeral honors for the state of Missouri for 2 years. I suck at that stuff, right? Like I can't train people with movements, and I'm not good with like grieving people. Like it was like the last thing I thought I would ever do, but I felt like I was ready for it. And I gotta say, it was hard. There were moments where I said, what did I get myself into? But that 2-year experience changed my entire life. It changed my whole career for one, but it also changed my mindset on everything in this world and what we're capable of, because I was able to get through 2 years of serving others in their darkest hour, which is something that was just so emotionally hard to get around. But since I've gotten past that and I have those 2 years behind me, I feel like I can do anything at this point. If I could do that, then I know I could do anything. So it all starts with taking that one step that leads to another step, that leads to another step. And before you know it, you've gone up 10 flights of stairs and didn't even realize it. You know what I mean?
100%.
Jess, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. You're such a special person. I want to thank you so much for you're at work right now. This is your office?
Yep, this is it.
You're at work. You stayed late for this talk, and I want to thank you for your time and for spending time with us and the Hero Front family. And with that, I want to just say, leave it open to you if you had any parting words, and if you wanted to plug anything for anyone listening that's like, hey, I do want to contact Jess. I do want to connect with her. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm all over. Absolutely connect with me. It's not anything fancy. Instagram is Jess Manfre. Facebook is Jessica Manfre. If you want to get involved, if you're looking, maybe for a little purpose in your life, Giving Tuesday is November 28th. That is the Hallmark program that inspired our entire nonprofit. And, we quite literally have ambassadors all over this world. I think right now we've got 42 states and 5 countries signed up. We give impact grants to help you with your community service projects. We've partnered, year in and year out. We were stationed in Illinois, just so you know, and I partnered with the First Sergeants Council at Scott Air Force Base. I was a thorn in their side because the Air Force has rules about coming on base and doing things. And so I would just park myself right there with them and made them my buddies. And so if you're looking for, a way to, kind of inspire and get a group together and, focus on kindness, like I'm here for you. But really, that's it. This was so much fun. I hope, if anything, people just take away that, we need each other. And, our stories have power. Share your story. Get it off your heart. And, someone that you tell it to or who reads it, whatever, is going to be inspired. You can save lives.
Absolutely. Amazing parting words to end this incredible episode. So anyone still listening, thank you so much, Jess. You're incredible. Thank you for spending time with us. And this was the hero's journey of Jess Manfre, and we're out.